Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jessica Zavala, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you on behalf of the Ohio Program for Campus Safety and Mental Health to today's webinar, Helping College Students Successfully Navigate the First Episode of Psychosis. Today, I am especially excited to be joined by two of my colleagues here at NeoMed, representing the BEST Center, as known as the Best Practices in Schizophrenia Treatment Center. Before introducing them, I have a few announcements to share. Our next webinar will be held on Tuesday, March 23rd at 11:30 a.m., where presenters from Cuyahoga County Board of Developmental Disabilities will be on hand to discuss COVID-19 among the intellectual and developmentally disabled population in higher education. And then for April, Dr. John Torres from Psychiatric Services and Harvard University will be on hand to discuss college mental health apps. So please be on the lookout for registration details for both of those webinars. I would also like to extend the invite to all of you for our upcoming virtual conference, Creating Community Wellness, Equity and Inclusion in Student Mental Health. The conference will be held on May 18th this year. If you are interested in presenting a breakout session or for additional details, please see our webpage or check us out on social media. Finally, this webinar will be recorded and the video will be made available for viewing via our YouTube channel. And now I would like to introduce our presenters for today. Crystal N. Donovan has been a champion of the social work profession for over the last decade. She completed her undergraduate and graduate studies at the University of Akron. She started her social work career in child welfare and then transitioned into the field of mental health. She currently serves as a consultant and trainer within the BEST Center. Prior to the BEST Center, Crystal spent over 10 years in an outpatient mental health setting. Crystal has several years experience as an assistant lecturer at the University of Akron, and she was recently appointed instructor of psychiatry here at NeoMed. Crystal is committed to equity and justice and is an active member of the NeoMed Diversity Council. Nicholas Dunlap is a consultant trainer at the BEST Center. He holds a Master's of Education degree from Kent State University and a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology, Sociology from Kent State University. He is a licensed professional clinical counselor and has experience in first episode psychosis, cognitive behavior therapy for psychosis, family psychoeducation, motivational interviewing, substance use disorders, gambling disorders, and co-occurring disorders. So without further ado, I present Crystal Donovan and Nicholas Dunlap.
All right, thank you, Jessica. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Hopefully this will pop up for everybody here. Thank you, Jessica, for the kind introductions, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We got a lot of hopefully helpful information for each of you as far as our topic and the things that we're going to discuss today. Okay. So a little bit about where Crystal and I are coming from. Within the Department of Psychiatry at Northeast Ohio Medical University, or NeoMed, there are three centers of excellence: the Criminal Justice Coordinating Center of Excellence, the Ohio Program for Campus Safety and Mental Health, and the Best Practices in Schizophrenia Treatment, or the BEST Center, which is where Crystal and I are located. And so part of what the BEST Center does is we provide training, consultation, technical assistance to accelerate the adaptation of best practices, promising practices for schizophrenia treatment in community settings. And part of what our mission is we want to get those practices out into the community as quickly as possible. So those individuals that are in need of mental health treatment can get it and get the ideal practice in the best or most promising practice as far as their care goes. Within the BEST Center, we have several different practices. First, or the Coordinated Specialty Care for First Episode Psychosis Program at the Best Center. That's what Crystal and I are consultant and trainers for. We also have the other programs that are listed here. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with those, but what Crystal and I do is we partner with community mental health agencies in the implementation of FIRST, as I mentioned, which is the Coordinated Specialty Care for First Episode Psychosis Program. We'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation today. But what we do is, as I mentioned, we train and offer consultation for those agencies that are implementing this program. And it's geared towards the early identification and treatment for first episode of psychosis. And so we'll touch on that as well. In kind of my portion at the beginning here of the presentation is going to provide a little bit of background and some information as it pertains to psychosis, and trying to tie it into higher education, and why it is such an important a place to identify individuals that are experiencing that early episode of psychosis, and why it's so important to get them into treatment as soon as possible. So these are our objectives that we're going to accomplish today. We're going to talk a lot about some early warning signs and things to look out for in individuals behavior-wise, language-wise, things that an individual may be exhibiting that you can kind of put things together. And I'm going to touch on this a little bit in a little bit, but just kind of highlighting the importance of looking at everything that is going on with the individual. A lot of the symptoms and the early warning signs, if you will, that we'll talk about in and of themselves aren't a clear identification of psychosis, but it's kind of looking at everything that is going on with the individual. And that's why when we have an opportunity, Crystal and I, to talk with individuals in higher education, or even high schools or middle schools, is really encouraging them to look at a lot of the things that are going on with individuals at those ages, and kind of piecing things together. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So when we talk about education, for most young people, most individuals want to pursue education. They may have educational goals, and it might not kind of fall into the category of a 4-year school or a 2-year school, but it may be technical goals that they might have. But for a lot of individuals, they do want to pursue some type of education and wanting to pursue that. And so when we think about poor performance, if we could use that terminology, or dropout rates, there's a lot of factors that could come into play, and lots of things to look out for, especially when we're talking about psychosis, which I'll touch on, but kind of thinking about things like GPA, social withdrawal, things that individuals might be experiencing that are so disruptive to their academic work. And I think about right now as well with the COVID pandemic that's going on with individuals, and a lot of individuals are missing out on that social aspect of school. And that has a tremendous influence, I think, on individuals' ability to perform. Some individuals strive being in the classroom and being around other people, and maybe now they're in an environment where they're doing everything virtually. It might not be an ideal situation for them when you think about it. And it certainly has an impact on mental health and mental illness as well. So according to SAMHSA, in 2018, approximately a little over 2.5 million emerging adults exhibited signs of mental illness in the previous year. And that number is it's huge when you think about the fact that a lot of the individuals that are on college campuses right now are suffering with a mental illness. Many aren't engaging in any type of mental health care. And I think that's a scary thing to think about, that there are individuals that are suffering and really desperately need help. And so hopefully kind of looking at the process where we can get individuals engaged and get them the help they need is something we can look at. You'll see one of the sources here on this slide is the Steve Fund. And I wanted to just kind of highlight that for some of you that maybe aren't familiar with what the Steve Fund is. And Steve was an individual. He graduated from Harvard and completed his master's degree at City University, and he passed away tragically in 2014. And his friends and family established this organization to address the mental health needs of students of color. And one of the things that they put forth a lot of ideas, a lot of truths as it comes to individuals and students of color, saying that they're less likely to seek help when they're depressed, twice as likely to say they are less prepared for college than their peers, and 1/3 less likely to complete college. And so I think those are things that they state that they want to work on improving for those individuals, for those students of color that are engaged in higher education. When you look at new college students with disabilities, including with the recent onset of psychosis, they're often kind of unsure and insecure about kind of navigating the systems for the first time at an institution, and looking for support that they never had outside of that higher education institution. And so, the students oftentimes have to overcome the stigma surrounding their disabilities and kind of have to advocate for themselves oftentimes. And so when we talk about and when we work with our teams that are helping individuals in schools, we talk about, looking at where they can get help on college campuses, where can they get some assistance. And so a lot of times there could be feedback from faculty or other staff at the institution of, maybe dismissive of things like psychosis, maybe of other mental health issues as well, maybe because the affliction is psychological as opposed to physical. And so sometimes there might be that, I don't want to say that doubt or lack of belief on behalf of the staff member, but there could be that doubt because it is something different than maybe what they are used to seeing when it comes to any type of physical ailment or struggles that the individual might experience. And so I think the big picture with this is that oftentimes individuals that could really benefit from getting some extra help oftentimes go without getting those accommodations for a lot of different factors. And I'm going to talk a little bit about barriers that literature has shown individuals have identified that make it difficult for them to seek help when they need it. So when we talk about some of the barriers and thinking about ways to try to overcome some of the barriers that may be in place or may be present, awareness and advocacy about the availability of academic supports is so important. And being able to let individuals know that the help is there and help them to know how to go about getting that help. And so kind of looking at some of the literature and what they have identified as some barriers that individuals seeking or needing support say they experienced or they felt as part of the process. So things like feeling embarrassed or bothered about disclosing their disability to faculty, fear of being stigmatized by faculty, that faculty were uncooperative or unresponsive, a fear of being stigmatized by other students, report miscommunication or lack of communication regarding accommodations, and challenges in obtaining proper documentation to receive the support. So those are just some examples of some of the barriers that individuals have felt or that they've experienced when looking to get the support that they need based on their mental illness. So when we think about first episode psychosis and some of the things that are most common, and Crystal and I working with our teams across Ohio, most of the individuals that are enrolled in our program are going to fall somewhere between the ages of 16 and 24. And I often think about, 16 to 24 for me, I enjoyed those years, but I don't think I would want to go back and just try again. There were so many things that were going on, so many stressors, and not just those negative stressors, but things like moving out on my own or starting college, changing friends, changing identity. A lot of people have an identity when they're in high school, at college, and things may change. Their friends may change. And so it's always things that we always want to keep in mind. And when we talk about some of the stressors and challenges for individuals at this age, we don't want to always think about those negative challenges or stressors, because there are so many sort of positive developmentally appropriate types of changes that individuals will go through, but just as equally challenging. So we always want to keep that in mind when we talk about the onset of psychosis. You have heard me use the word psychosis quite frequently here. And when we talk about our program, first being a coordinated specialty care for first episode psychosis, the word psychosis is in our program. And so we always, Crystal and I always make it a point to think about the words we use and the language that we use. Some individuals with lived experience, they don't agree with the term psychosis, and they believe that the term psychosis can be very stigmatizing. And so we do want to be very mindful of the terminology that we are using when we talk with individuals, and exploring what individuals are going through. Being mindful not to put a label on it, because we're not sure what the individual refers to what they're experiencing as. And so we want to think when we're conversing, when we're having dialogue with individuals. Other types of things when we talk about first episode psychosis is a lot of times the symptoms that the individuals experience they lead to isolation, because there's so much confusion and uncertainty about what the individual is experiencing, that maybe they're fearful about being around other people. Maybe they're concerned about what their behaviors might be, based on maybe symptoms, hearing, for example. And so oftentimes those symptoms do lead to kind of withdrawing and isolating from others in their life. And the one thing that we always try to emphasize when we talk about psychosis is that it affects people from all different walks of life. Anyone and everyone is susceptible in the right circumstance, with the right experiences, to experience psychosis. And so we always want to keep that in mind, not kind of put psychosis in a box of an individual's experience, when anyone and everyone can and does experience it. So as I mentioned, looking at some of the early psychosis and earlier psychosis warning signs, and it is important to acknowledge the challenge in recognizing, one of these terms, one of these items in and of themselves, it's not enough to support an individual, let's say, having psychosis symptoms. The combination of these, and I emphasize, is when you're looking at individuals, especially, again, I'm looking back at individuals 16 to 24 years old, some things that they are experiencing could be kind of common or regular adolescent or young adult behaviors. And so we want to be very mindful that it could lead to some misinterpretation. And so we want to be very careful about that. And here's some other examples when we're talking about recognizing early psychosis. And just as a reminder, we don't want to look at any one of these as a kind of the clear all tell, if you will, but just a couple of things, sudden or pronounced obsession or preoccupation with narrow themes or topics. So one common example might be with that is some individuals develop a pretty intense preoccupation with, let's say, religious themes or religion itself. Difficulty getting to or staying in class, doing homework, completing assignments. So experiencing a lot of challenges with regard to the assignments or the education that they might have. So again, we wanted to kind of look at all of the things that the individual might be experiencing, and looking at perhaps trying to piece some of them together in a clearer picture. The last thing that I'm going to talk a little bit about is our hope, Crystal and I, our hope in driving home the importance of early identification and treatment when it comes to psychosis. And it involves a topic called the duration of untreated psychosis. And part of what the DUP does is it's very, when you look at first episode psychosis in the literature, first episode psychosis, it does oftentimes look at the duration of untreated psychosis. And it's the ways that it's measured can vary, and it can be very different. But big picture is that the sooner that an individual is able to get in, not only just to receive treatment, get in the best treatment that they can, or the ideal or the best practice with treatment, the sooner that they can do that, the better the outcomes are. And I think about that, it's common for any type of illness, physical illness that an individual has, right? The sooner that the individual is able to receive treatment, the better. And so this is just kind of highlighting that. This slide is kind of explaining how it can be measured when we look at the duration of untreated psychosis. And then there's a couple of slides here that we look at longer duration of untreated psychosis. So you can see here just some of the outcomes that happen when an individual is struggling with their mental illness, when they're struggling with their psychosis for a longer period of time. The outcomes long term, or even sooner or recent, it can be bad, as it can be worse as well. And so the idea is we want to get to shorter duration of untreated psychosis, and that's part of what our program is trying to do, is promote that early intervention. The sooner that we can get individuals into treatment, the better the outcomes can be. And so part of this is part of our program is oftentimes a shift in thinking, that where individuals that have been diagnosed, let's say with schizophrenia, that they have to apply for disability, and they can't work, and they can't do a lot of those things. And part of when we get individuals into treatment sooner, it can certainly improve the likelihood that individuals can accomplish those things. And I know a lot of young people that are enrolled in our programs, they talk about the things and wanting those things that a lot of young people want, right? They want friends, they want families, they want a place to live, they want a good paying job, a lot of the things that most everybody their age wants. And so this early identification and treatment programs like FIRST offer that as an opportunity for individuals in looking at coordinated specialty care programming and some of the best practice interventions that are involved in not just our programs, but most coordinated specialty care programs have elements of what you see on this slide, and certainly has involvement, especially with regard to supported employment and education, and the importance of being able to work towards that. I know I'm going to, real briefly, because I want to turn it over to Crystal, and she's going to kind of bring us home here, but talking a little bit about FIRST. And I know we have individuals from places outside of Ohio that have joined us today, and Crystal's going to hopefully share some information, a link that may be useful for those of you that are outside of Ohio a little bit later. But looking at coordinated specialty care programming in your area or where you're located, hopefully we'll have something similar to what this eligibility criteria looks like. There may be differences in age, maybe differences in diagnoses, but the important thing is looking at the third item where it talks about experiencing no more than 18 months of psychosis. And so it really emphasizes the importance of getting individuals into treatment as soon as possible, so that they can get the ideal care. In addition to not having to struggle for any longer than they possibly can have. Okay, I'm going to stop my share and I'm going to turn it over to Crystal. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for providing such a detailed description of early psychosis. I appreciate you also stressing the benefits of a shorter duration of untreated psychosis. I'm going to talk to you just for a couple minutes about ADA considerations. Timmerman and Mulville highlight that many students battle societal redshirting when they're considering accessibility services. The redshirting is about them feeling exposed, feeling vulnerable, As Nick mentioned, some have concerns around confidentiality and stigma. I might be dating myself, but when I thought about redshirting, I thought about the Scarlet Letter. And to make a very long story short, essentially, it was a story about a woman named Hester. According to her community, she created this egregious act, and part of her sentence was she had to walk around with this scarlet letter. So wherever she went, people knew that she had committed some act that others did not approve of. And so just thinking about how does that apply to some of our students is that, they're weighing the pros and cons, but at the same time, they have some legitimate concerns about redshirting, because one of the unintended effects of redshirting is that the very policies that make disability exceptions can potentially separate students living with a disability from students that are non-disabled. And it really makes sense. I taught for several years at a local university, and I think about some of those students that waited to the very end of the semester to seek accessibility services, or some of them never did. It wasn't until maybe I saw them the next semester or 2 semesters later that they felt comfortable enough seeking assistance. So just something for us to think about as we start talking about accommodations for those living with psychosis. And again, these are suggestions by NASHBID, and this reference is going to be in the PowerPoint slides that you will receive after the presentation. And this is just a handful of accommodation suggestions. And this information we feel is good for anyone in any role in higher education. So you may not actually be the one providing academic services, but possibly you can provide support, you can help the individual highlight what they want to speak about in their meeting, or you might be in a position where you can help the student role play. So this is simply about having a support person in a meeting where maybe usually it would just be a one-on-one event. I was watching a TikTok video, and there's a lot of good information on TikTok, and it was a young person actually talking about this, and she was simply saying that when she needs to complete a task, that there are times where she just needs someone in the room. She doesn't want that person to say anything. She doesn't want them to do anything, but just having that person in the room helps decrease her anxiety, and then she's able to focus on that task. When we're thinking about students that might participate in some type of internship or practicum, we want to start early. So we want to be able to identify and then outreach organizations, agencies that are going to provide the needed accommodations. It's very similar if we were thinking about someone with a physical disability. I was on an organization's website, and on the homepage, which I did appreciate the transparency, they stated that they had a ramp so that one could get into the building. However, they did not have any accessible restrooms. And so with my social work hat on, I was thinking, well, we wouldn't send a student that uses a wheelchair to this agency. So again, not every agency is going to meet the student's needs. So again, just asking that we're able to start that process early. So if we're talking about an action plan, it might be a residential plan, could be a treatment plan, having conversations about any potential behaviors that might interrupt their academic success, and highlighting those the events, the experiences that might lead to those behaviors. So for example, lack of sleep, which often happens in places of higher education, or deadlines, stress around deadlines. Again, something that's pretty common. And so there's suggesting that essentially just write that right into the plan. So then it keeps it in front of the student as well as the other faculty and staff members. This one is my favorite, I'll be honest, the ability to freely come and go. Wouldn't we all love that? But thinking about how it can just be a challenge to be able to sit in one place for 90 minutes, for 3 hours. So if you think about classes or certain meetings that students might have to participate, is there a way that students that might already have some increased anxiety, increased paranoia, can they be in the back of the room so they can stand up when needed? Or maybe they need to sit by the door so they can get up and go get a bottle of water, or maybe just walk around the hallway, and then they can come back and actively participate. This also applies to virtual platforms. As Nick mentioned, there are many classes and meetings that are online now. So just thinking about, what's going on in the class, in the meeting, and asking the question, does the camera need to be on? That camera can be very intimidating for some individuals, especially if they're already having some increased symptoms. Thinking about, what does active engagement mean? So can they use the chat feature? Again, speaking up, that can be somewhat, can cause some anxiety for some individuals. I observe a project with students and they sit on these Zoom calls, and there is so much good information and good interactions that happen in the chat. So they are engaging with each other. They are providing feedback, answering questions, all in that chat feature. And then this one made me laugh. Again, I was thinking about when I was teaching, and a lot of students don't like group projects. And if we're just going to be honest, many of us do not enjoy group projects. But there might be legitimate times that it's best for the student if they're able to complete the components of the group project through an individual project. If they can just do possibly a paper or just having a conversation regarding what's going to best meet the students' needs while still meeting the core components of the assignment. When I was teaching, there were times also in regards, I'm thinking about class presentations. And so beyond the typical anxiety that we all experience, for some individuals, that's just going to cause a lot of anxiety, paranoia, which essentially takes away from the presentation. And so there were times that people had to be brave, they had to be vulnerable, and they came to me. And together we decided that they would just do the presentation and it would just be the two of us. And for some people, they still wanted to stand at the front of the room and I sat in the audience. For others, we just sat down. We just sat down on a one-on-one basis, because really, ultimately, I wanted the students to be able to provide me the information, but to be able to do it in a safe environment. So speaking of safety, we're just going to shift a little bit, and we're going to talk about cultural humility when you're working with individuals that are living with psychosis. I'll be honest, I love this picture, and I also love this quote. So I'm going to just read it to you. Psychiatry must learn from anthropology that culture does considerably more than shape illness as an experience. It shapes the very way we conceive of illness. And I know you talked about cultural humility, and I know this is something that all of us are working on every day. Just want to highlight some of the language that's on what would be the right of my screen, and want to think about the multiple identities that people living with psychosis experience. So they're not just their mental illness. It makes me think of myself as a Black woman. I often have to remind people that Black women are not a monolith. And that also applies to people living with psychosis. Again, they are oftentimes just placed in a box as if they are all the same, as if they all have the same experience. And they all have different races, ethnicities, gender identities, possibly religious affiliations. So just really, ask individuals as you're working with people and students that have psychosis to be able to step back a little bit and really view them as the whole person. So there are various components of cultural humility, but partnerships, that's the one that stands out for me. That's part of the reason Nick and I are here this afternoon, really looking at how you could potentially develop partnerships with coordinated specialty care programs in your community. And just looking at, the advocacy and what does that look like within your organization? What are some gaps A good example is that here at Neomed, the students, they were their own advocates. And they came to counseling center staff and talked about that they wanted to have experiences working with therapists that were reflective of them, that were reflective of their experiences. And so as a result, our counseling center has partnered with another community organization. And so ultimately looking at if the student is not getting their need met through the counseling center already has this relationship, can make the appropriate referral, and then again, can best meet that student's needs. And so when we're talking about students that might also be experiencing psychosis, amongst many other things, we want to learn from their stories. Their stories matter. We want to recognize how their understanding of psychosis fits into their experiences and their expectations. Because I feel the information in the box is so important. So for example, there's been a huge, or probably not enough emphasis on the violence and the racism that is happening with the AAPI community. And so we ask individuals, do a little homework. So in that example, there's a lot of history of racism with that community, but also very recent, there's been an increase in violence against individuals from the AAPI community. So it helps if you have a student from that community, that there's already that foundation. Doesn't mean you know everything, but that's already that foundation, so that when the student is able to come in, they can talk about their own experience within that larger community. And just recently, there was an article presented by Jones and her colleagues, and it was talking specifically about structural disadvantages and racial disparities within first episode psychosis programs. And this is one of the examples that was provided, and it was discussing a client that was of specific island descent, and that the client believed in reincarnation. And a lot of the story involved the story of conflict with Japanese ancestors. So in the article, unfortunately, it reads as if there's concerns about colleagues not affirming the individual's beliefs and making everything about pathology. So I thought about, what could we do? How could we turn that story on its head? And it's very simple, routine strategies that we easily lose because we get busy and we're thinking about the next task, but really just validating that student's experience, approaching with humility and openness, and then hopefully creating this healing space within the context of their belief system, while also building a relationship, establishing trust. Because ultimately when we're thinking about individuals living with psychosis, again, they have multiple identities. And I think we want all students to ultimately have a safe, affirming, and welcoming environment so that they are able to flourish. And speaking of flourishing, Nick and I had the honor of working with a college student that's gone through the Coordinated Specialty Care program. He was actually working with the Best Center briefly, but he has since moved on to bigger and better things. However, we thought that it would be helpful to be able to hear from him so that he can share his lived experience. So we are going to take a few minutes and hear from Ben.
When most people go to college, they have some anxiety, and most people have anxiety about class and about grades and about fitting in and about going to parties and about joining clubs and that kind of stuff. When I first went to college, all I was thinking about was, how do I stop my panic attacks? And then how do I stop the psychosis and those kind of things. Actually, my aunt saw a commercial and she called my mom and she was like, hey, I think Ben would be really good for the first program. You should check it out. Part of me was excited, part of me wasn't excited. The fact that I was going to get a caseworker and an employment specialist and a therapist and a doctor, I was like, yes, I'm going to get really good help. But another part of me was like, I don't want like my friends to know this, so my social life might have to be put on hold. There was a lot of acceptance that I had to learn when it came to my mental illness, just in things in general, like whether it's medicine or how somebody's acting toward you or what you can do, and knowing your limits before getting too stressed out and feeling overwhelmed. I think an acceptance part is accepting those things and knowing what those things are also. Because I really like therapy, I really like the one-on-one, I love that stuff, and I say that stuff, I know really what it is, but to say like, I got a lot from that. So they were very patient with me when it came to job search and that kind of stuff. And they helped me with resume building, they helped me with job search and like making connections, and that got me out of the house when I did get a job. It definitely helped me reacquaint with people. It probably was one of the biggest things that helped me go back out and have a relationship with people and be able to grow that way. And it's almost a completely different feeling. So for people in the first program to give a hope that telling their clients that they can move on, they can get a job, and they can go to school and have friends and have, a relatively what you would call a normal or productive or happy life is a big essential part in, I think, recovery.
Ben has graduated, and I am believing that he is making an impact in his community. Before we finish our presentation, we do want to highlight first episode Psychosis Programs in the state of Ohio. So as Nick explained earlier, the Best Center has 13 programs in 23 counties in Ohio. So we are in Northeast Ohio, if you can see my pointer. And then we jump over here to the west, move down to Lima area, Dayton area, and then Cincinnati area. Ultimately, we want all students to be able to have access to coordinated specialty care programs if they are in their area. And so there are also programs in Franklin County, as well as south of Franklin, and then over to southeast. Those programs are through the Ohio State. So there is information in regards to Best Center programs, as well as the Ohio State on Ohio Moss's website. And we have something for those individuals that are out of the state. So I did leave this for last. I wanted to make sure that we had some connection. So this just highlights coordinated specialty care programs across the nation. So there are programs, and they are listed in alphabetical order based on state. Unfortunately, there might not be a program in every community in every state. However, the ones that are listed, that are available, are listed here. Nick and I were talking, we did realize that our program, some of the information was a bit outdated. People leave, people move on. So we do encourage you, if you see the list, opposed to just emailing the individual, reaching out to the actual organization. And the last thing I wanted to leave you with, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Nick and I want to thank you for letting us join with you this afternoon. And we also just want to thank you for the work that you're doing. And I believe we should have a few minutes left for any questions.
All right. Well, first and foremost, I just want to certainly extend thank you to both you and Nick for presenting such an awesome and very informative presentation. And I took quite a bit of notes here, even though we work just right across the department from each other. But again, a lot of things that was revealed within this presentation, and I just jotted down a few things: a shift in thinking, and we know that that's really paramount to work in the behavioral health field and recovery and different things. That's really so important. You also talked about redshirting, and I know you talked about redshirting from really a academic sense, but I also think of it too in terms of a sports. That's the way I'm more so familiar with that term for individuals who are freshmen in college and they're redshirted. But certainly there's some opportunities as we think about accommodations and think about the example you gave with a student who, for example, with virtual platforms. And so I do appreciate you calling that out as we are having conversations with counseling centers and various other individuals that work with students that this has become a new normal, and giving students the opportunity to opt out of certain things and to opt out of that participation as it may not be comfortable for them, especially again when it comes to a virtual platform. You also talked about within your slides regarding culture, humility, and partnerships. And so that's really key for us, even as one of the centers of excellence. We feel that it's key and it's vital for community organizations as well as institutes of higher education to partner in promoting mental health well-being, to partner when it comes to suicide prevention efforts when it comes to students. And so, but that's a question that I have regarding, so let's say we're a counseling center at a specific institute of higher education. Who would be the best contact if we're interested in, having a presentation on first episode psychosis, or to learn more about the program? Who would be that contact or that very first step to reach out to?
So I think there's a lot of layers that I think can go into this. I think that ideally the first place to start would be any type of local recovery board, mental health and recovery board. Those are always good places to start, especially if a community identifies there's a need for any type of coordinated specialty care for first episode psychosis program. I think the board is a great place to start, because then the board could then explore what kind of options there are out there. And I know Ohio we do also have, and Crystal and I had the opportunity to partner with several organizations in the state of Illinois, as well as the state organization in Illinois. And they have some of our programs that they're using over there as well. They don't have county boards, and so they didn't have that luxury. And so a lot of the organizations, the agencies, went to the state mental health office itself and advocated to have programming available. So I always think that's a good place to start as far as wanting to get a program in your community and have it be available. And I think as Crystal and I have been able, and we've been very fortunate to do presentations about FIRST and about coordinated specialty care programming and about psychosis, I think it's always a good opportunity for us. It's one of our goals. We want to get the word out when it comes to early identification and treatment of psychosis. And so, there are opportunities if I don't want to speak for Crystal, but you could certainly reach out to us if you were interested in getting more information about psychosis for your agency. If it was something that you were interested in, you could certainly reach out to us. And if it's not something that we're able to do, we could certainly point you in the right direction with that as well.
Thank
I
you.
think
so
I
much.
answered your question, Jessica.
I was just going to add to that. You always, as Nick said, can reach out to us. A community might not be ready to actually start a program, but they want more information. There are certain times that other organizations, again, want more information in regards to early psychosis. So, we've been able, through this virtual world we live in, to make ourselves available to be able to meet those needs.
All right. Thank you both for that response. And so, Nick, were you going to add something else?
Yeah, I was just gonna add something real quick, Jessica. I think as you look at the treatment locator for your area, a lot of the quote unquote criteria for the program might be different based on, from one area to the next or one provider to the next. So one of the things that Crystal and I, when we talk with potential individuals that could refer people to a program, don't get caught up too much in trying to figure out if the person is appropriate or not. If that's part of what the team is there to do. And so if you have an individual and you think, well, maybe they're appropriate for the program, maybe not, refer them to the program anyway, and if the individual ends up kind of not meeting the criteria for that specific program, the hope is that they would get them engaged in whatever treatment is appropriate for them. And so it nothing is hurt, nothing is bad. I mean, ultimately the individual would be getting involved in treatment anyway. And so always think about that as well. Don't get too caught up in trying to figure out if the person's appropriate or not based on the criteria. Let the team do that. And so being able to refer an individual certainly puts the movement in place for that. So I just wanted to add that as well when you look at the
Sure.
locators and where agencies are.
No, and that's really helpful to hear, as you may not have the expertise or the background, or, if there's assessment or further information that's needed. So that's really helpful to add. There is a question that did present, and the question is, do you have recommendations for working with students experiencing psychosis within a college counseling context? Should students always be referred out? And I think that gets to kind of a little bit what we're talking about here, but maybe you may have something else to add.
I wouldn't think they always have to be referred out. We do want the student to be able to hopefully, drive the conversation in partnership with the counseling center, and just, having some honest conversations about needs, expertise, how comfortable is the counseling center, so if they're not comfortable, then, referral might be more appropriate. The coordinated specialty care programs also provide, supported employment. They can provide case management as well. Mm-hmm. So referral might be necessary if the student has some other needs. Mm-hmm. But we're looking specifically at therapy, again, just that shared decision-making, which is a huge part of coordinated specialty care, figuring that out together. Because, we want the student to initially, depends on where the student is at, that might be another then place they need to go, another place they have to divulge information. So, initially there's been times maybe where the counseling center is doing 1 or 2 appointments, then the student might be more comfortable and then look at doing a warm handoff. Mm-hmm. That NASHBID paper that I was actually using within the presentation that had those recommendations, there were several more. I think I highlighted maybe 5. So again, that is listed in the references in the PowerPoint. And so that paper should have some very specific suggestions around advising, residential services, and counseling services.
Right. And I think to even highlight your point of what you're making in terms of student voice and choice. And so that's what we also talk about a lot too. And so, whether it's a comfort issue or just that a student is, already more familiar, or another place may be, a place of service may be closer to where they reside at. So, just kind of keeping all those things in context as well. And it looks as though we also have a response from the attendee saying that it seems like a referral would also be appropriate if the on-campus services are limited to only when the student is enrolled. And so that's also a great point.
Yeah.
Correct. So really looking at how, not all, that can be challenging, especially maybe if the student's not from that area, but thinking about breaks and thinking about summer, or if someone has to take a semester off, to be able to, at least, and then to have those resources. I mean, for some students, they might be fine with the counseling services when they are enrolled, but that can be an opportunity maybe as you get near the end of the semester to start having a conversation about what's next. And, again, the counseling center having the resources and, making the referral. So we do want there to be a continuity of services once the student is not enrolled.
Right. And I even think about another point you made regarding post-graduation. And so, if services are needed beyond that point, as the video so adequately put together in terms of Ben's story, and I'm just excited for him and his next journey and steps, that, making those connections again to community partnerships. If that ongoing service is needed, then they also have, that level of support in the community.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Nick, were you going to add something else?
No, Crystal said it beautifully. I was just going to say what she was saying. So yeah, that was exactly about the school.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, I have 2:00 on my end. Again, Nick and Crystal, I just want to thank you both for a very awesome and informative presentation on, again, connecting college students to services and accommodations. There were a lot of buzzwords for me. Crystal, you mentioned TikTok, and so I'm a little behind when it comes to that, but I appreciate you highlighting that as well. And we thank you for your time and for participating today. Thank you, and have a great day, and stay warm.
Yeah. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Goodbye.